While my father was dying in surgery, my stepmother was drinking champagne on a yacht. The man who had devoted his life to her was lying open-chested under a surgeon's scalpel, and she was raising her glass as if she had already buried him. I didn't hear this from gossip. I saw it. The photo came to my phone while I sat frozen outside the operating room, my hands clenched so tightly the nails cut into my palms. There she was. Victoria, smiling wide silk dress glinting in the sun, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Around her, strangers' laughed music played, and in her eyes I saw no worry, no grief, only freedom. My breath caught. The caption was short, cruel. "She's celebrating your father's last breath." I wanted to believe it was a mistake, maybe an old photo, but I knew better. The skyline behind her matched the same morning light I had seen rushing into the hospital. The champagne bottle bore today's date etched in gold. Even the Rolex on her wrist was the one she had flaunted to me just a week ago. This wasn't fake. This was live. My stepmother wasn't sitting in a waiting room. She wasn't praying. She wasn't holding my father's hand. She was already living like a widow. Anger flared, but beneath it was something colder, heavier fear. Because I knew Victoria. I knew her smirks at family dinners, the way she shut me down when I asked about money, the subtle tightening of her grip on my father's arm whenever he tried to include me in decisions. She had always wanted control, and now, with him under the knife, she was close to having it. Too close. My phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, not a photo, but a snippet of video, her voice light and carefree saying, "By tonight, everything will finally be mine." My stomach dropped. She wasn't just heartless. She was waiting for him to die. Or worse, counting on it. I pressed the phone to my chest, trying to steady my breath, while down the hall the monitors beeped faintly, reminding me that my father's life was slipping second by second. And then another thought clawed its way in, more terrifying than the image of her smiling on that yacht. If she got what she wanted, she would not only erase my father, but take Ethan too. My little brother, only 7 years old, too young to see the monster his mother had become. That was the moment the rage turned into resolve. If Victoria wanted to celebrate my father's death, she would first have to face me, and I was not going to let her win. My name is Anna. I am 31 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life writing stories about corruption and betrayal. As a journalist for the Chicago Tribune, I thought I had seen every kind of greed this city could breed. Politicians caught selling favors, executives bleeding their companies dry, families torn apart over money. But nothing I had covered in print could have prepared me for watching my own family implode under the same poison. My father, Robert, was 68, a retired professor of American history. He wasn't a rich man in the way businessmen are rich, but he had worked hard, invested carefully, and built a life of comfort. A house in the suburbs valued at over $2 million, a pension and retirement fund, a life insurance policy worth more than $1 million. Enough for security, enough to be tempting to anyone with the wrong heart. My mother died when I was 12, and for years it was just the two of us, me and Dad. He encouraged me through late nights studying Celebrated when I got my first byline and stood in the rain cheering when I walked across the graduation stage. But when I was 16, he met Victoria. She was dazzling, 10 years younger than him, sharp cheekbones, perfect hair, the kind of presence that fills a room. I remember the first time she walked into our home. She placed her handbag on the counter like she already owned the place. I never trusted her. She was too polished, too quick with compliments that rang hollow, too eager to talk about the future in terms that always circled back to money. Dad didn't see it. He saw someone who laughed at his jokes, listened to his lectures, and brought him back to life after years of grief. And so, he married her. A year later, Ethan was born. My little brother. Half-brother, technically, but I never thought of him that way. From the first time I held him in my arms, tiny fists curling around my finger, I swore I would protect him. He grew into a sweet, curious boy who loved dinosaurs and bedtime stories. But he clung to me more than his own mother, and Victoria hated that. She hated the bond we had hated when he reached for me instead of her. Over time, her coldness toward me sharpened. At dinners, she would dismiss my questions with a smirk. "This is between your father and me, Anna," she'd say, locking her hand around his. When I mentioned his retirement funds or asked about his health, she would cut me off with a glare that silenced the room. She treated me like an outsider in the home I grew up in, and still I tried to ignore it, telling myself Dad was happy, telling myself Ethan needed both his parents. But sitting in that hospital with the photo of Victoria on the yacht burning in my hand, all those memories rearranged themselves into something clear and dangerous. The little barbed comments, the secrecy around finances, the way she had pushed me out of medical decisions claiming my father had signed new papers. Now I saw the pattern. She hadn't just been dismissing me, she had been eliminating me. Slowly, systematically preparing for the day when she could stand alone on the deck of a yacht and claim everything, house accounts, insurance, and even my little brother. And if my father didn't survive that surgery, she would have exactly what she wanted. The day after the surgery began with the same sterile light that never seemed to change inside the hospital. I walked down the ICU corridor carrying a cup of stale coffee, bracing myself for whatever news the doctors might give. But before I could even reach my father's room, a nurse blocked me. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "You're not listed as having visitation rights. Only his wife can approve." My heart dropped. "That's impossible. I'm his daughter." She shook her head, pointing to a chart. "The file has new medical power of attorney papers. It's signed by your father, witnessed and notarized." I froze. I knew my father's handwriting like I knew my own. The signature on that page looked like a parody of it, too smooth, too fast. My father had been heavily medicated in ICU before surgery. There was no way he signed anything, and yet the paper was stamped official legal. Victoria appeared then, sweeping down the hallway in heels that clicked like a metronome. Her perfume preceded her, expensive and suffocating in the sterile air. She offered me a smile, but it never reached her eyes. "You shouldn't be here, Anna," she said, tilting her head. "Your father needs peace. Stress isn't good for him. Go home." I clenched my fists. "Why am I not on the visitor list? What did you do?" She gave a little laugh as though I were a child having a tantrum. "Robert made his choice. I'm his wife. I decide what's best for him now." Her gaze lingered, daring me to argue. "And frankly, he doesn't even recognize you half the time. He asked me yesterday, 'Who is that woman?' I didn't have the heart to tell him it was his estranged daughter. I wanted to scream, but the words tangled in my throat. I had seen my father the night before surgery, lucid and sharp, squeezing my hand, telling me not to worry. Victoria was lying, but she was lying with papers to back her up. I left the ICU that morning with rage boiling under my skin. My first call was to the hospital records office. They confirmed what I feared: a new durable power of attorney had been filed 2 days earlier, witnessed by 2 hospital staff members whose signatures looked suspiciously similar. The next call I made was to my father's bank. I still had limited access to his statements, a relic from years ago when he had added me as a secondary user for emergencies. The numbers made my stomach twist. Over the last 6 months, nearly $300,000 had been withdrawn in increments just small enough to avoid triggering alerts. The transfers all went to an account under Victoria's name. I scrolled further. Jewelry stores, designer boutiques, a down payment for a new yacht club membership. She was bleeding him dry while he struggled to stay alive. That evening, I returned to the hospital hoping to catch Ethan. He was curled in a chair in the waiting lounge, clutching a toy dinosaur. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Anna," he whispered, "Mommy says we might move soon. She says Daddy wants us to live by the water." My chest tightened. Ethan was only 7. He didn't understand that by the water meant the house Victoria had been eyeing on Lake Michigan, a property I had seen listed for almost $2 million. A house she could never afford without my father's money. I crouched down, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Don't worry, buddy. You're not going anywhere without me." But even as I said it, fear gnawed at me. If my father didn't make it, Victoria would have custody of Ethan by default. She could vanish with him, take him overseas, cut me out forever. 2 nights later, I overheard a phone call that confirmed everything. I had returned late, hoping to speak with one of the ICU doctors. Passing by a family consultation room, I heard Victoria's voice inside. I paused, heart pounding. "Yes, I've spoken to the lawyer. Once Robert is gone, we'll move quickly. The new will is ready. Anna is excluded entirely. Everything transfers to me, including custody of Ethan. She won't have a claim." A pause, then her laugh soft and cold. "I told you by the end of this week it will all be ours." I stumbled back, pressing against the wall, bile rising in my throat. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. She had filed false medical papers, drained his accounts, manipulated witnesses, and now she was plotting to cut me out of the family entirely. But she had made one mistake. She assumed I would sit quietly. That night, I called Mark, my old friend from college who had become a lawyer. "I need you," I whispered. "It's about my father. It's about Victoria. She's planning something, and if I don't stop her, I'll lose him and Ethan both." Mark's voice on the other end was calm, steady. "Start gathering proof. Every document, every transaction, every witness. If she's crossed the line, we'll catch her." As I hung up, I glanced at Ethan asleep beside me, his small hand curled around mine. In that moment, the weight of responsibility pressed down harder than ever. My father was fighting for his life, but I was fighting for something just as fragile, our family's survival against a woman who wore cruelty like perfume. And I promised myself I would not lose. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital before sunrise. The fluorescent lights hummed above, and the halls smelled faintly of bleach and despair. I had barely slept, my mind looping Victoria's words over and over. "By the end of this week, it will all be ours." I couldn't shake it. If I was going to stop her, I needed proof. Proof stronger than her lies, stronger than the papers she waved around like weapons. That was when I met Linda. She was a nurse in her 40s, sharp-eyed and kind, the kind of woman who saw everything but spoke only when it mattered. She pulled me aside near the coffee machine, her voice low. "You're Robert's daughter, aren't you?" "Yes," I said, wary. She glanced around before slipping a folded sheet of paper into my hand. "I shouldn't be doing this, but I was here when your stepmother brought in the DNR order. Your father never signed it." The signature looked wrong. I filed a quiet note in the chart. "Here, take this. It's a copy before she could get it sealed." My throat tightened as I unfolded the page. There it was, my father's name scrawled in a style that looked like an imitation, the strokes too fluid, too unnatural. I felt both fury and gratitude all at once. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Linda's eyes softened. "Because I've seen families torn apart by greed. And your father doesn't deserve this. Neither do you." That same afternoon, I called Mark. We met at a diner near the courthouse, a place we used to haunt back in college when finals nearly broke us. He was 33 now, a rising lawyer with a sharp mind and a reputation for digging where others wouldn't. He listened carefully as I laid out everything: the blocked visitation, the forged signature, the drained accounts, the overheard call. When I finally stopped, he leaned back, tapping his pen against the table. "She's overplayed her hand. Forgery, fraud, financial abuse. If we get hard evidence, this isn't just civil, it's criminal. But we have to move fast. If your father doesn't make it, she'll claim everything before we can blink." I swallowed hard. "Where do we start?" "Follow the money," Mark said simply, "and watch her moves. People that greedy always leave a trail." That trail began sooner than I expected. Later that evening, as I left the hospital, I noticed a man leaning casually against a parked car, cigarette glowing in the dusk. He caught my eye, nodded once, and walked over. "You're Anna?" he asked. His voice was gravelly, his stance relaxed but alert. "Yes," I said, my guard up. "Name's Harris. Detective. Retired now, but your friend Mark called me. He said you might need someone who knows how to dig without leaving fingerprints." He handed me a card with just his last name and a number. "I've dealt with people like your stepmother before. Polished on the outside, rotten inside. If she's hiding something, we'll find it." Something in his eyes, world-weary but steady, made me believe him. I nodded, tucking the card into my pocket. The final piece of my growing circle came 2 days later when Mark introduced me to Dr. Patel, a forensic accountant with a calm demeanor and eyes that missed nothing. He spread out bank statements across his desk, pointing with the precision of a surgeon. "See? Here," he said, tracing the withdrawals. "This pattern is classic structuring, taking just under 10,000 at a time to avoid federal reporting. Whoever did this knows exactly how to stay under the radar. But they slipped. One transfer accidentally went over by a few hundred. That triggered a soft alert. I can subpoena that record. It will lead us to the offshore accounts." I leaned closer, my pulse racing. "So you can prove she's been stealing?" He nodded. "Yes, and if she moved money offshore, that's not just theft, that's concealment and fraud. Prosecutors love cases like this." For the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me. Hope. I wasn't alone anymore. Linda with the forged DNR copy, Mark with the law on his side, Harris with his street instincts, Patel with his forensic eye. One by one, allies were stepping out of the shadows, handing me weapons Victoria couldn't see coming. That night, as I sat beside Ethan, helping him color in a dinosaur book, I felt his little hand slide into mine. "Anna," he whispered, "will Daddy come home?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "We're doing everything we can, buddy. And no matter what happens, I promise you this, you will always be safe with me." His innocent eyes blinked up at me full of trust I couldn't afford to break. It was in that moment I realized something vital. This wasn't just about protecting my father's legacy. This was about protecting Ethan's future, and that made me more determined than ever. Because now I wasn't fighting alone. I had a team, and Victoria had no idea what was coming. The investigation began with paper because paper never lies. Mark Harris and I sat in his office surrounded by stacks of files, statements, and photocopies Linda had risked her job to slip to me. The forged DNR order was our first anchor. Harris ran a practiced finger along the signature. "Sloppy work," he muttered. "The strokes don't match the pressures off. Your father writes with his hand angled left, this one's straight. Whoever signed this had a steady hand, not a man pumped full of anesthesia." Mark nodded. "And the witnesses. Same handwriting, just slanted differently. Classic case of a nurse or aide being pressured into signing off, or maybe forged entirely. Either way, we'll subpoena the original and pull security footage from that day. If Victoria was there alone, it'll speak louder than any argument. But the real storm was financial. Dr. Patel spread out a series of charts on the table lines of red ink circling transactions. 6 months of siphoning, he explained. Always $9, $800, $9, $700, $9, $600. She thought she was clever avoiding the $10,000 threshold for federal reporting, but she wasn't careful enough. "Here." He tapped a page. One transfer, $10, $342. It triggered a soft alert. I filed a request through a contact at the Treasury's Financial Crimes Unit. They'll confirm soon. I stared at the numbers, bile rising in my throat. 300,000 gone. My father's years of careful saving drained like water through a sieve. "Where did it go?" I asked. Patel's lips curved in a humorless smile. "Cayman Islands, a shell corporation under the name RVE Holdings." I cross-checked the formation documents. The listed address, a yacht club in Miami. That ties her to the photo you showed me. Harris leaned back, exhaling smoke from the cigarette he wasn't supposed to light indoors. "She's not just greedy. She's planning an exit. Offshore accounts new house by the water custody of the kid. She's staging a full erasure of you and your father." That night, Linda called me again. Her voice shook urgency leaking through the line. "Anna, you need to know this. Yesterday, Victoria tried to bribe one of the ICU residents. She told him if my father coded, he should respect the DNR immediately. She waved cash in his face. My stomach twisted. Did he take it? No, he reported it quietly to me off the record. But she's testing boundaries. If she doesn't get what she wants from paperwork, she'll push harder. I barely slept. I dreamed of my father's monitors flatlining of Ethan's small voice calling my name while Victoria dragged him away. I woke drenched in sweat, my heart pounding with a single truth: we didn't have time. The next day, Harris and I followed her. It felt surreal, me, a journalist used to chasing corrupt politicians, now tailing my own stepmother through the polished streets of Chicago. She walked into a law office on Michigan Avenue. Harris snapped photos of her with the attorney, a man known for handling estate disputes and high-value wills. "That's Martin Lowell," Harris said. "Shark in a suit. If she's meeting him, she's rewriting something, probably the will." Sure enough, Mark pulled court records and found a recent filing, a petition to update Robert's estate plan. The draft left everything to Victoria, with me cut out completely. Even Ethan's guardianship was listed under her sole control. "She's preparing for his death," Mark said grimly, "and she's moving faster than we thought. We knew we needed something irrefutable. Words and suspicions wouldn't hold in court. We needed a smoking gun." That's when Patel called with a discovery. One of the accounts she funneled money into was used to purchase medical supplies, syringes, specifically potassium chloride. My blood ran cold. "Isn't that—" "Yes," he confirmed. "It's used in lethal injections. In small doses, it can trigger cardiac arrest and look like natural heart failure. If she got her hands on that, I felt the room tilt around me. She wasn't just waiting for him to die. She was preparing to help it along. Harris sprang into action. We set a trap. We let her feel safe, watch where she hides it. If she's reckless enough, she'll bring it to the hospital. 2 nights later, Linda called again, whispering so quietly I could barely hear her. She was in the supply closet. I caught a glimpse of a vial, potassium chloride. She stuffed it in her purse when she saw me. We moved quickly. Harris coordinated with a contact still inside the force. A hidden camera was placed in the ICU wing, angled at the supply closet. Another near my father's room. We waited. And then we got it. Footage of Victoria slipping into the room past midnight, pulling the vial from her purse. Her hands shaking only slightly as she reached for my father's IV line. Linda entered just in time, her presence startling Victoria into freezing. The vial disappeared back into her bag, but the footage was clear. When Harris showed me the video, my knees buckled. "That's attempted murder," I whispered. "Yes," Mark agreed, his voice hard. "And it's enough to open a case." But even with this, we knew she'd fight back. She had lawyers' money and charm. She could spin the narrative, claim she was adjusting medication, paint me as the jealous daughter. So we gathered more. Patel traced another shell company tied to a property in Naples, Florida. Harris uncovered photos of her with a man at the yacht party, an offshore banker notorious for laundering. Linda documented every irregular instruction she gave the ICU staff. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together: fraud, forgery, theft, attempted homicide. By the time we pinned everything on the board, it looked less like a family drama and more like a criminal enterprise. And yet, even with all of this, I felt a pit in my stomach. Because evidence was only half the battle, the other half was confrontation. And that was coming faster than I wanted. It was a Saturday evening when Harris called. His voice was clipped urgent. "She's moving. Yacht Club downtown tonight. Bring the file." The file, our arsenal of proof, was heavy in my bag. Bank statements, Patel had traced photos, Harris had snapped the forged DNR copy from Linda, and most damning of all, the USB stick holding the video of Victoria slipping that vial of potassium chloride from her purse. The marina glittered under floodlights, the water rippling like black glass. Yachts stood in rows, gleaming symbols of wealth and vanity. I spotted her easily. Victoria, draped in a silk shawl, a champagne flute in hand, laughing with a cluster of people who looked just as polished and hollow. Her diamond earrings caught the light as if mocking me. I walked straight toward her. Every step felt like steel grinding against stone, every breath a reminder of my father fighting for his life in ICU. She turned her smile freezing when she saw me. "Anna," she purred, trying to sound casual. "What are you doing here? This isn't your world." "No," I said, my voice steady, "but it's the world you built out of my father's blood." The laughter around her hushed. Guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing a scene. Victoria's eyes narrowed, her mask cracking. "Careful, darling. You don't want to embarrass yourself." I opened the folder and let the papers fan out on a nearby table. 300,000 siphoned from Dad's accounts. Transfers just under 10,000. A shell company in the Caymans. Care to explain? Her painted lips twitched. Business investments. Robert approved them. I pulled the next sheet. "Then what about this, the forged DNR? His signature, your handwriting. Linda saw you slip it into his file. You bribed a resident to enforce it if he coded. Explain that to me." A ripple of whispers ran through the group. Victoria's hand tightened around her glass until I thought it might shatter. "You're delusional," she hissed. "Always jealous, always clawing for scraps. Robert never trusted you. Why do you think he left you out of everything?" I took a deep breath and dropped the final card. I held up the USB stick. "Because you tried to kill him. We have the footage, midnight in ICU, the vial in your purse. You would have ended his life and called it natural, but you were caught." Her face drained of color. For the first time, I saw real fear flicker behind her eyes. The crowd shifted further back. One of the men murmured, "Jesus Christ." Another woman crossed herself. Victoria tried to laugh, a brittle sound that cracked like glass. "You can't prove anything. You think the police will listen to you, a bitter daughter desperate for attention." I stepped closer, my voice low enough only she could hear. "They'll listen to the video. They'll listen to the bank trails, the forged will, the nurse's testimony. And when Ethan takes the stand one day, he'll remember that his mother tried to erase his sister and his grandfather in one breath." Her hand shook. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the deck, golden liquid spilling like wasted wealth. For a second, silence swallowed the marina. Then Harris appeared at my side, his badge glinting under the lights. "It's over, Victoria. We've already handed everything to the state's attorney. Consider this your last toast." She stared at me, fury radiating from every line of her face. "You'll regret this," she spat. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I held her gaze unflinching. "No, Victoria, you underestimated who you were dealing with." The security at the yacht club moved in not to protect her but to escort her off. The guests scattered, muttering some snapping photos that would no doubt find their way online. As she was led away, her shawl slipping from her shoulders, I finally felt my lungs expand, air filling me with something dangerously close to relief. But I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the first crack in her armor. Because the real battle, the courtroom, was still to come. The courthouse smelled of old wood and colder justice. Morning light slanted through the tall windows, striping the floor like prison bars. As I took my seat behind Mark at the plaintiff's table, I felt the weight of 100 eyes pressing on me. The gallery was packed, journalists, curious neighbors, even some of my father's old colleagues. Our private nightmare had become public spectacle. Victoria entered moments later, draped in black, her hair pulled into a severe bun, sunglasses hiding her eyes until she removed them for effect. She clutched Ethan's hand, parading him like a prop. My chest tightened, but I caught his small wave before she yanked him forward. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Ramirez, stern and unsmiling, presided. "We are here to hear charges of fraud, forgery, financial abuse, and attempted homicide against the defendant, Victoria James Morrison. Counsel proceed." Mark rose smoothly, his voice crisp. "Your Honor, this case is about betrayal. A man fighting for his life in surgery while the woman who vowed to love him sought to profit from his death. We will show evidence of forged documents, stolen funds, and a direct attempt to end Robert Morrison's life prematurely." Victoria's lawyer Lowell stood next. "The prosecution seeks to tarnish a grieving wife. These accusations are fabrications of a bitter stepdaughter desperate for attention and inheritance. We will prove my client acted with nothing but devotion." The first witness called was Linda. She walked with quiet dignity, clutching her nurse's badge like armor. Mark guided her gently. "Ms. Rodriguez, did you see the defendant bring a do not resuscitate order to the ICU?" "Yes," Linda said firmly. She handed it to staff, insisting it was urgent. But the signature didn't match Mr. Morrison's. I noted it in the chart. Mark displayed the copy on the overhead screen. "Is this the same document?" "Yes." Lowell swooped in on cross-examination. "Nurse, you are not a handwriting expert, correct? So your opinion on the signature is meaningless." Linda met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not an expert, but I've watched Mr. Morrison sign consent forms for 3 days. That signature is not his." A ripple ran through the gallery. Judge Ramirez nodded curtly. "Noted." Next came Dr. Patel. He projected graphs and bank statements on the screen, pointing with a laser pen. "Here we see structured withdrawals, $9, $800, $9, $600, avoiding federal alerts. The funds funneled to RVE Holdings, a Cayman shell tied to the defendant. One slip-up of $10,342 triggered a federal alert corroborated by the Financial Crimes Unit." Mark asked, "And what were those funds used for?" "Luxury goods, yacht club membership, and a property in Naples, Florida. Purchases made while Mr. Morrison lay in the hospital." Lowell attempted to downplay. "Isn't it possible Mr. Morrison authorized these investments?" Patel clicked to the next slide timestamps of transfers made while my father was in surgery under anesthesia. "No, sir. Impossible." Whispers surged in the gallery. The most devastating moment came when Harris introduced the footage. The courtroom lights dimmed, and on screen appeared Victoria slipping into the ICU after midnight, the vial glinting in her hand. The video showed her reaching toward my father's IV line, freezing only when Linda entered. A collective gasp swept the room. Someone in the gallery muttered, "Oh my God!" Lowell shot to his feet. "This proves nothing." She was adjusting medication concerned for her husband. Harris took the stand, his gravelly voice steady. "I spent 30 years on the force. That was no adjustment. That was an attempt. And that vial potassium chloride. I recovered the hospital's inventory log, 2 vials missing. The defendant had no authorization." Victoria's mask finally cracked. She rose, voice shrill. I was trying to save him. He was suffering. He wanted peace. Judge Ramirez slammed the gavel. Order Mrs. Morrison sit down. The final witness was me. My hands trembled as I swore in, but when I looked at Ethan sitting in the front row, his wide eyes on me, strength steadied my voice. I recounted everything being blocked from visits, the lies about my father's memory, overhearing her plan to cut me out. And then I looked straight at Victoria. You tried to erase me. But worse, you tried to erase my father before his time. You wanted his money, his house, even custody of his son. But you forgot one thing: I don't scare easily, and I don't stop. For once, she had no retort. Closing arguments sealed her fate. Mark's voice rang with quiet conviction. This is not just greed. This is cruelty. And cruelty has no place in the sanctity of family or in the eyes of the law. The jury deliberated only 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady. We find the defendant guilty on all counts. Gasps, cries, whispers erupted. Victoria slumped, her composure gone, mascara streaking down her face. Lowell stared, defeated. Judge Ramirez pronounced sentence 25 years in state prison. Custody of Ethan granted to me as guardian with regular oversight. Financial restitution ordered from seized accounts. I felt my knees weaken, tears blurring my vision. It was over, at least the battle in court. But as the bailiff led Victoria away, she turned, once her eyes burning with venom. This isn't the end, Anna, she hissed. Maybe it wasn't for her, but for me, for Ethan, for my father, it was the beginning of something new. The gavel's echo still rang in my ears long after the courtroom emptied. 25 years. The words felt heavy, final, and yet almost surreal. I had spent months bracing for this battle, nights poring over documents, mornings sitting at my father's bedside, and now the storm had broken. Victoria was gone, not vanished, but locked away, her empire of lies dismantled piece by piece. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters hurled questions. Anna, how does it feel to win custody? What will happen to your father's estate? Do you think justice was served? I shielded Ethan with my arm, his small frame pressed against me. He buried his face in my coat, overwhelmed by the noise. Mark stood beside me, answering calmly. The evidence spoke for itself. Justice prevailed today. Harris hovered nearby, eyes scanning for trouble, old habits never dying. Dr. Patel shook my hand, a rare smile breaking his normally stoic face. You did it, he said simply. But victory was not without scars. The accounts my father had built over a lifetime were fractured. Patel assured me restitution would come, but the money wasn't what I grieved. It was the trust broken, the innocence shattered. My father had welcomed Victoria into our home, believed her laughter, her vows. And she had repaid him with betrayal sharp enough to nearly end his life. When I returned to the hospital that evening, my father stirred for the first time in weeks. His eyes fluttered open, groggy but alive. I leaned close, tears spilling freely. Dad, it's over. She can't hurt you anymore. His fingers, weak but warm, squeezed mine. Anna, Ethan. His voice cracked, but the relief in it was unmistakable. For Ethan, the change was immediate. No more tug of war, no more whispered threats. He slept in my apartment that night for the first time, clutching the stuffed dinosaur we had colored together weeks earlier. He whispered before drifting off, I knew you'd win. News spread quickly. Neighbors dropped by with casseroles. Old colleagues sent letters. Even strangers emailed me saying they saw themselves in my fight. One message read, I lost my father to a woman just like her. Thank you for standing up. Victoria, meanwhile, made headlines of a different kind, socialite convicted of fraud and attempted murder. Her mugshot replaced the polished yacht photos she had flaunted. Her Naples property was seized. The yacht club revoked her membership. Friends vanished, creditors circled. I visited the courthouse one last time to sign guardianship papers for Ethan. The clerk handed me the stamped documents, the ink still fresh. My name beside his, it felt like both a responsibility and a rebirth. Walking out into the late afternoon sun, I realized the war was done. Not cleanly, not without cost, but with justice intact. And for the first time in months, I let myself breathe. 3 months after the verdict, spring arrived in Chicago. The snow-melted crocuses pushed through the thawing soil, and life, slow tentative, returned. For us, too, the seasons had shifted. The house that once felt haunted by Victoria's presence was finally ours again, not through money or legal titles, but through peace. My father's recovery was slow, but every day was a step forward. He moved from ICU to rehab, then finally home. His voice, once a whisper, regained strength. Sometimes he would sit by the window Ethan curled beside him and tell stories from his days as a professor. I caught them both laughing once their heads tilted the same way, a reminder that blood ties were stronger than any betrayal. Ethan blossomed too. The nightmares that had plagued him, dreams of his mother pulling him away, of my father disappearing, faded little by little. He started soccer at the community center, his laughter echoing across the field. At night, he'd run to me with drawings, us three, and stick figures, the words, "my family," scrawled above. As for me, I returned to my work as a journalist, but something had shifted. Exposing corruption in politics had always mattered, yet now the fight against betrayal within families felt just as urgent. I wrote an op-ed for the Tribune, "The Silent Epidemic, Elder Abuse and Family Betrayal." The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in, sons, daughters, even grandparents, each with their own story of trust broken and justice sought. It became clear what happened to us was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a larger pattern. So I partnered with Linda and Harris to form a small foundation, the Morrison Trust, aimed at helping families detect financial abuse early. Patel volunteered his expertise, offering workshops on spotting fraudulent transfers. Mark handled the legal side pro bono for those who couldn't afford counsel. What began as survival for us became a shield for others. Sometimes when the house is quiet, I still think of Victoria. The venom in her eyes as the bailiff led her away, her hissed promise. This isn't the end. I don't fear her anymore. 25 years behind bars is a long time. Even if she one day walks free, the truth is fixed. The world saw her for who she was, and Ethan saw too. No matter what she claims in the future, he knows. One evening, as the sun set orange over Lake Michigan, my father called me to the porch. His hands trembled as he held a small box. Inside was a ring my mother's wedding band kept safe all these years. "Anna," he said softly, "you carried this family when I couldn't. You protected me, and you gave Ethan a future. This belongs to you now. Not as jewelry, but as a reminder of what love truly looks like." Tears blurred my vision as I slipped the ring onto my finger. It wasn't about inheritance or wealth. It was about legacy, the kind that no fraud or forged will could ever erase. I thought back to that night in the hospital when everything seemed hopeless, when I believed Victoria might win. If I had given up, then if fear had silenced me, none of this would exist. My father would be gone. Ethan would be lost. And justice would have been buried under greed. Instead, we chose to fight, and that fight became our freedom. Now, when I tuck Ethan in at night, I whisper the same words. Family isn't defined by who betrays us. It's defined by who stands with us even in the darkest hour. He always smiles sleepily and answers, "That's you, Anna." And I know in that moment that everything we endured was worth it. If you were in my place, would you have fought back against my stepmother or walked away? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories of family betrayal and justice to light.